Canada has seen a lot of changes to their development charges over the years, but now we are seeing that there's a lot of move towards really reforming development charges. And Prime Minister Mark Carney on May the 2nd, during his first conference, stated that he will be slashing development charges by 50%. Now, that's great news. On the provincial level, what we have seen is that new bills were tabled on May the 12th. And in fact, that bill was actually reached royal assent on June the 5th. What that means is that we now have new bill that is somewhat agreed upon by all political stripes that it is necessary. Then on the municipal level, what we have seen is that the Ontario big city mayors met and they all seem to be in agreement that development charge reform is necessary, and they also seem to agree that the direction that Bill 17 is taking is meaningful. Now, with that said, I have seen that on June the 12th, the City of Toronto Executive Committee met along with Mayor Chow, and they decided that this was actually a great move, and in fact have decided to defer development charges for all residential suites across the board, not only large condominiums. So this is great news. Let's jump into some of these details. Mark Carney, the head of the Canadian government, has set pretty robust goals for development charges, and essentially it is designed to curb the expenses on a home. So he have decided, based on the platform and some statements that he made during his first conference, that he is going to essentially slash in half development charges. And if you are not aware, since 2013, development charges have risen almost 1,000-fold in some centers around Ontario. So, and probably in other parts of the Canada as a whole. So what is we're looking at now is that he's deciding to cut that. So for example, maybe development charges in some places, for example, Durham, and I'll actually show in right here, you can see that. Bottom line is, math is like in Durham region, currently apartment DC's development charges is roughly about $49,000 to $50,000 for a 2-bedroom. Now, if he were to actually go ahead and successfully implement this policy, that would mean that that would be slashed in half. It's roughly around $24,800 to $25,000, which is about equivalent to what the equity would be for a first-time home buyer to make a minimum 5% down payment on a $500,000 condo. So this is significant, and this is something that I think a lot of people aren't necessarily looking at, but this can have huge ramifications. And as you can see, if someone is actually able to make a purchase like that, it would certainly spur on development, because right now the condo market has stalled, not to mention all other markets have significantly dropped in activities, and we're actually currently in a buyer's market even though no one's buying. It just means that there's way more inventory, and it would take a significant, I think, more than 7 to 8 months for that inventory to clear up. So Mark Carney, our federal government, our prime minister, is actually making moves to move the housing crisis and make this housing system work. So development charges is also top of mind for the provincial government, and the provincial government is led by Doug Ford. And what we have seen is that Ford Nation, as well as his government, have tabled new legislation. That's Bill 17. Now, Bill 17 is actually just part of an array of bills that were designed to address the housing crisis, to build homes faster. And that started all the way back in 2019 with Bill 108, Bill 109, Bill 23, Bill 185, and now we're at Bill 17. But specifically in Bill 17, we are seeing that there's a real move to address the development charges, which has actually gained approval from industry organizations, which actually do think that it will support the development and lower cost of building. So let's talk a little bit about some of those changes. Well, it goes without saying, one of the major changes that we are seeing with regards to these new legislation that is going through the Commons is that there is certainly a lowering of temperature and, for lack of a better word, some conditional support coming from across party lines. So the Green Party have certainly decided to support some aspects of Bill 17 as it relates to reducing development charges and potentially even deferring fees and removing interest payments that developers do have to pay, which certainly burdens and oftentimes reduces the viability and feasibility of a project. So let's talk about how it is some of these development charges are applied. So this is one of the sites that I look at when I'm doing my research. They actually do land use planning and development, and I think they do great articles on the topic of bills that are coming through legislation. So I actually would recommend that anyone that's interested in finding out more and researching this topic more, like to take a look at some of their breakdowns. Here it's actually quite detailed. So development charges are actually levied against all form of new construction, institutional, commercial, industrial, and of course residential. And here I'm going to focus more on the residential side. So let's say you're doing a high-rise building, a mid-rise building, or even a missing middle type project. Some of those residential units will be exempted from specific development charges, but others certainly will have to account for development charges. And of course, in the city of Toronto, this can range up to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the number of units. Now, these development charges need to be paid at the time the permit is issued. So before even construction is begin. In fact, those permits at this time would be withheld if there's not an arrangement to defer the fees, in which case interest would be applied. You certainly need to pay those fees in advance. Now, those development charge fees, they go into the city coffers. They, of course, invest that, and it then gains interest, and that is used to fund growth. So let's say a high-rise building was installed. That development charge will then be applied to, for example, installing greater transit service within that neighborhood, or probably upgrading the sewer or water lines, or even providing some type of soft infrastructure, which may fall under development charges under maybe a different category. But this is how it is applied. Now, let's take a look at what it is Bill 17 is doing to address this and lighten the burden of DCs for developers. So here's a high-level overview of what you can expect to see coming from Bill 17 as it relates to development charges. And while the regs are still in development, I'll probably make a video on that once it's completed to kind of discuss some of the exact requirements that would need to be met. But right now, what we can see from a very high level is that payment timing, like right now, a project that has actually been approved by the city, you have two options. One is to pay the DCs at the time the permit is issued, or you can ask for a deferral, but there is an expense to doing so. There's interest that will be accumulated. So that interest is actually going to be wiped out. So with the exception of interest that has already been accrued. So that's one of the things that the provincial government is actually trying to institute through Bill 17. Another is that the interest on previous deferrals, that essentially says that, the interest on existing rental institution deferrals will drop to zero. So no more interest. They're no longer allowed to basically capture interest and basically gain from the deferrals that was actually arranged between the developer and the city. And this one is really interesting. I've seen that, there's going to be a mandatory exemption on all long-term care home beds. So these are permanent beds for care homes. So basically, it's really designed to support people who have helped build Ontario. This is our elderly population. And then there is this very specific thing known as a freeze. So when a complete application is received for a development or deferral, that is actually set for a 2-year term, and then the city can revise their development charge policy, and then you can get wrapped into that, meaning interest rates can change and so forth. And this is something that this freeze is now 2-year long, but they're going to extend it to 3 years. At least that's what's being proposed, and that's what has been actually adopted by Bill 17. And then, of course, there's the municipal interest. So the municipalities can capture interest within that deferral or freeze period. So what it is, the provincial government is stating is that there's no more interest above prime that could be collected. And of course, this is very high level. I would suggest that you take a deeper look into the Ontario Legislative Assembly website. Take a look at Bill 17. It's called Protect Ontario Build Faster and Smarter Act. Take a look at that document and actually get more exact information on what it is it entails. So on the municipal level, I can see that there is a lot of changes happening as well. So the Ontario big city mayors just met, and in their meeting there was some support. There was a lot of support, but also I guess there was the mayor of Burlington, who actually chairs that committee, that's Ontario big city mayors, actually did agree and did support the Bill 17 provisions as it relates to Bill 17 and the deferral of fees and so forth. Now, in addition to that, what we have seen is that our big city, Toronto, Mayor Olivia Chow actually did in fact met with the executive committee on June the 12th. That's June the 12th, I believe that was, or maybe June the 16th. And there they were actually assessing the impact of Bill 17 on the city of Toronto. And Mayor Olivia Chow moved a motion and it was carried to amend, right, the bylaws so that it reflects Bill 17. So Toronto is moving in the direction of deferring their development charges, not only on large scale residential developments, but across the board. So this really speaks well for my small scale developers who are doing 2 to 10 units, right? But of course, this still has to be go through city council, where all the ward councillors can have an opportunity to debate and discuss this. But this is looking very positive. But let's get down to the bottom line. What does this mean for small scale developers who I mostly work with? Look, I don't want to take away from what I've seen happening as far as on a large scale, development charges are going to have a huge impact on large scale projects. But on a small scale, where it is clients are simply taking single family homes, demolishing them, building new 4+1s or maybe up to 10 units, this can have significant impact. And what I'd like to talk about is how DCs actually are currently handled. So if you did a 4+1, we call it a Plex Plus, right? So you were building a main house, you're installing multiple dwelling units in it, maybe 2, maybe 3, probably 4, as with the bylaw would support today. And then you are adding a garden suite at the rear, a residential garden suite, a detached structure that houses a dwelling unit is allowed on any residential parcel of land in the city of Toronto. Then how you would actually execute that today would be you would have to issue the building permit for, or be issued the building permit for the 4-unit dwelling or the 3-unit dwelling in the main building, and have that first completed before you are actually able to then move forward with the detached structure or newly built garden suite in order to have the development charges waived, right? Because you're only allowed to be deferred charges up to 4 dwelling units. However, once the building is already completed, you are going to be waived that development charges on the garden suite, which is exempted. Now, of course, there's a lot of nuance here. It's actually quite inefficient to build and supply housing in that manner, as you can imagine. And also it does sort of make it difficult to get approval by CMHC for insurance for a mortgage product. So because they only insure when a mortgage when there is up 5 or more units on a parcel of land. So this is extremely important and will be extremely beneficial. So with this new bylaw, this is actually going to help to reduce that inefficiency and actually allow these projects to pencil better because they can now go straight to CMHC insured mortgage product. That's the MLI, that's mortgage loan insurance products, which is MLI Select, to actually have their projects funded in a way that would allow it to be successful. So these DCs, this type of bylaw and provisions are extremely beneficial to developing more home and specifically more missing middle projects in the city of Toronto and across Ontario.